Into the latest edition of ESPN FC Live. Manchester City are champions for a fourth consecutive time. It was the 10th time the title race went down to the final day in the Premier League. Maybe didn't offer the excitement we might have hoped in the end, but the big talk is Manchester City are champions. If you're wondering why Janusz Michalik is looking across the screen, he's watching the celebrations at Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp, on his final game there. We've got LME as well and Gab Marcotti too. So I'll start with you, Luis Miguel. Give us your reaction to Manchester City this season, sealing the title.
Well, I mean, in many ways, it was everything that we expected. Obviously, I think when you face somebody like Manchester City, regardless of how good you're doing, and let's not take anything away from what Arsenal has done this season, it was a really great season under Mikel Arteta. The project continues underway, but you have to be perfect if you want to beat the almost omnipotent Manchester City. And that's exactly what didn't happen for any opponent to face Pep Guardiola's side. And, here's the thing. It's not like we haven't seen this before, but at the same time, I think Man City were also in many ways lucky in terms of momentum. The Club World Cup final in December, December when they had that real tricky unjoyous moment when they weren't getting any wins at all and they were looking not great in the table. They went away and they kind of regrouped, and that was their opportunity to really come back together. Kevin De Bruyne coming back from injury, Erling Haaland looking at his best when he came back from injury himself. And I think that those were the moments when Liverpool and Arsenal really should have been, we need to keep going. We cannot afford to do anything. And that didn't happen. And you can't do that when you face Manchester City. And yes, we can talk a lot about what other teams didn't do. But in the end, today, I think, like the game against West Ham and Arsenal's game against Everton was in many ways a microcosm of who Manchester City are. They need to just get the job done no matter what. And that's exactly what they did. And regardless of what we want to talk about moving forward, in the history of English football, never has a team won 4 domestic league titles consecutively. And they've done that. So well done to Pep Guardiola and Manchester City.
Your thoughts, Gab, on what we've seen from Manchester City today all season and this 4th consecutive title for them?
I mean, I think LME nailed it, right? It's 134 years they've been playing top flight football in this country. And nobody's ever won 4 in a row. It's obviously 6 and 7, which I think is another stellar achievement. Let me get up ahead of this because I know that there's going to be people out there, the haters are going to point out, yeah, but what about the 115 charges? And we won't know about that because of the process and the way they've decided to do it and the way the lawyers have kind of forced us to do it. But I will say this, I mean, even if City are guilty of all the charges, and they may or may not be, if you simply look at the spending that City have done, if you look at the wage bill that City have had, and you compare it to the top sides in Europe, it's not significantly bigger. In fact, in some cases, it's lower than the very, very top sides. We have a very lopsided, very unequal football league, not just in England, but around Europe. And within that, City are among the biggest spenders, among the wealthiest clubs. They're right up there. But it's not like they're orders of magnitude ahead of Manchester United or indeed Liverpool or indeed Arsenal. I mean, if you look over the last 10 years, or Real Madrid or Barcelona or Paris Saint-Germain or Bayern. So this is really incredible what we're seeing. Sometimes more than one thing can be true. And the way I think that the club has been run has been pretty close to perfect over the last 6 or 7 years.
So what hope can any other team have, Janusz, when you get to the final day of the season, you're Arsenal, you barely step a foot wrong all season, and you're still 2 points behind the mighty Man City?
Well, I mean, other than being perfect, and I look back at some of the seasons, sometimes that's not enough, right? Liverpool was nearly. I mean, they've lost 1 game. Okay, fair play. They've drawn 7, but I mean, you have to have 9, around 100 points to get through them. But what you need to have is obviously something that Jurgen Klopp showed, something that Arteta continues to show. But the key here is, because next season is going to be no different. I'm waiting to see. Maybe I missed it. Gab will probably tell me. I mean, I thought it was significant that once again Pep Pep Guardiola came ahead of the game saying, I'm not going anywhere. I will be here. They're just as hungry every year. I've talked about on Friday, we were all here just about, we've talked about how relentless they are, regardless they're winning 3-4, 5-0. I've watched that again. I watched these little details because I think everything else is obvious to just about everyone. So I look for that little edge, and it's incredible what these players do, game in and game out. And Gab is quite right. It's irresponsible to even mention the fact of 115 when it comes to the players and the managers. Players, by the way, we know last. Nobody's going to share that information. Even if they did, they wouldn't know, or I wouldn't know how to look at it. Again, Gab is probably the only one that can actually coherently say something about this. What does that mean? To players, they need to play. They need to be challenged. So, sorry I went in a roundabout way, but in order to challenge that, I hope that Mikel Arteta doesn't just add to the squad, because you need to challenge your best players. That's the difference between Manchester City and the rest. Liverpool are actually the closest to it. They were contenders this season. I think, barring some injuries and maybe the announcement from Klopp, they sort of have that culture where almost no one, with the exception of maybe one or two players, is sure of being in the starting 11. You don't have that at Arsenal. So that's the next step. If they keep the hunger, they're hungry, right? Now you have to say, okay, Saka, you better play. I mean, he's playing good football, but that doesn't exist at Arsenal. And that, to me, is always the difference. Because look at Manchester City. Take away maybe 2 or 3 players. Nobody is sure of their place in the starting 11.
Can you anticipate more of the same next season from both of these two sides then, LME?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say something about Arsenal quickly, just defensively, because they are ahead of schedule. We have to remember that. Mikel Arteta's project is fantastic. And you have to be just exactly what Gab and Janusz were talking about. You have to be perfect, if not hope for less perfection from Manchester City in order to beat them. And I think Mikel Arteta and Arsenal fans, definitely Arsenal fans, should feel very proud of what they have done. And obviously the season wasn't lost today. It was lost, in other matches. It was lost in other moments as well during that campaign. And as I was saying, Manchester City, who went through that rot at the end of last year, began 2024 with all guns blazing, and you just knew they were not going to lose a single game in the league. And so that is a wake-up call for everybody. So I think, to answer your question, I expect the same from Manchester City. I expect them to strengthen once again. Gab said it, I agree. This is a squad that's if not the best organized squad in Europe, it's definitely one of the. It's definitely well arranged. The reason why Pep Guardiola wants to stay is because he's happy where he's at. But Arsenal's and Mikel Arteta's Gunners are going the right way. But I agree with Janusz. Now they really have to keep pushing and challenging themselves. They have to really become a stronger, strengthened squad. Last season, they were the youngest squad in the Premier League. So it takes time for them to understand this. Remember, Mikel Arteta joined Arsenal in January of 2020. So, it wasn't too long ago where he only had his first full season. And now for the second consecutive time, they've ended second. That is commendable. In the era of Manchester City's dominance, winning the Premier League is not necessarily the exact prerequisite to demand how good your season has or has not been done. If you want to beat Manchester City, you have to be perfect. You just have to be. But right on course for Arsenal and Man City. Liverpool, I'm a little bit worried about them. Not worried, that's the wrong word. But I'm intrigued to see what happens under Arne Slot. Obviously, he's a great manager, but I'm intrigued to see what happens when you're trying to shake off the identity of a legendary manager that was Jurgen Klopp and bringing Arne Slot and his ideas. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
What does your gut tell you on that next year then, Gab? Do we look at a 2-horse race here, or do we see the likes of Liverpool challenging?
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly contrarian view here, so this may surprise you. I don't think City were that good this year relative to last year. If you go through it, if you look at the individual, some of the individual player performances, obviously Foden, big strides forward. I think this year, more than other seasons that I can remember, I think injuries really hit the league hard, with the bigger clubs. And I really hope that whoever's in charge of the medical staff at City and at Arsenal, who, among the big clubs were the two who stayed the most injury-free, I hope they get their medals too, because I think it worked out very well for both of these clubs. You look at the points total. You look at, maybe some of the questions going forward. I don't think Pep is going to he's going to want to sit on this on his hands this summer, because when he looks back, and I take on board everything you guys said about the run in 2024 and all the victories and whatever, but I don't think this is where he necessarily wants to be. He doesn't want it to be this close, where a team like Arsenal can push him all the way. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens. I mean, funnily enough, and not to be conspiratorial, but Pep's contract is set to expire in 2025, but it's kind of a meaningless contract because, you know, if he decides to leave, he's going to leave. And if he decides to stay, he's going to stay. He has that much. He's earned the political and sporting capital there. Arteta's contract also expires in 2025. I would expect some sort of announcement very, very soon. And if I'm Arteta, I would also probably want to carve out some guarantees about the investment that, you know, is going to be made in this Arsenal team going forward, because, you know, we can all point to areas where they can strengthen. And if I'm Arteta, I say, hey, we got really fortunate with injuries this year. We can't count on that every season.